Dear all, I'm Cyril Herman, Youth Delegate for the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and I will guide you through today's press conference. I welcome you all warmly to our press conference, where we as GYBN give you a broader perspective on how we answer the most important questions for our generation. Is the Global Biodiversity Framework assuring us a future? I welcome the following representatives: Josefa Tauli, Mirna Fernandez, and Derek Mugisha. They are all coordinators of different chapters of our network. We are speaking on behalf of the more than 100 youth delegates who were able to participate in this year's COP, on behalf of the 15 youth chapters, on behalf of the more than 1 million young people from more than 600 youth organizations from 172 different countries. The fact that we, young people, have such a presence and a voice here did not come out of nowhere. No, young people who met 12 years ago at COP10 have worked hard for the last 12 years to build this international network. Thanks to them, the four of us are sitting here today. This commitment has been welcomed by various parties and the CBD, and we were enabled to be present and advocate for our priorities at all negotiations since the 2020 working groups. And so we are here again this year, organizing, protesting, lobbying, and intervening for our three main priorities. First, intergenerational equity, which we achieve through full and effective participation of the youth. Second, transformative education. And third, right-based approaches for people and nature. And all this under the youth-led campaign of Stop the Same. But have the parties met our demand? Let's check if anything has changed or if the GBF stayed the same.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Josefa Tauli. I'm one of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network's policy co-coordinators, and I'm an indigenous Ibaloy Kangkanaay Igorot from the Cordillera in the Philippines. This COP is the culmination of 4 years of sustained efforts to make our voices heard and bring our voices to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, despite many challenges. The collective efforts of youth and joining forces with many others in civil society, including indigenous peoples and local communities, women, grassroots NGOs, and others, have produced many elements that can be considered as landmark victories in breaking the conservation silo that has for a long time ignored its links to social inequalities. For example, the framework now features unprecedented calls to action that address intergenerational equity, inclusive participation, access to justice and information, human rights-based approaches, gender equality, and respect for the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. These are significant victories, and they are a clear indication that our collective efforts have produced results, that our participation here add value to decisions and make them better, they make them more effective and more equitable. We are going to hold our governments to account to these commitments. Now, the big fight will be to clean the framework of false solutions that could cause further destruction of biodiversity. And I pass on the microphone to my colleague Mirna, who will talk more about this.
Despite the language that we can see as wins in the new Global Biodiversity Agenda, today as early of today, 18th of December, we can see a framework that still lacks a strong language and promotes false solutions for biodiversity, including, for example, nature-based solutions without clear safeguards for implementation into targets. We have a definition for this, but we don't have clear safeguards, guidelines for implementation. We don't know how this is going to be implemented. This has not been agreed in any multilateral agreement. Biodiversity offsets and credits as innovative schemes when we know that these are solutions that have been implemented in the 70s and they have never worked for the biodiversity and for the communities that depend on the ecosystem services and functions. We see a general lack of ambition, mainly because even though we can see a commitment of $200 billion per year, 20 or 30 billion of these would come only from countries, developed countries and economies in transition, but most of it then will open the door to private finance without any safeguards for the implementation of this. We know that a private finance for biodiversity is not something we really understand, and we have seen a lot of dangers on this kind of finance coming for biodiversity without safeguards. There are no safeguards on the target on resource mobilization, on how this is going to be implemented, and moreover, this target has components that are called these innovative schemes that would open the door for perverse schemes of offsetting for biodiversity, trying to replace ecosystems that we lose for the next decade, and not doing anything about this loss, but lying to indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youths who have been taking care of biodiversity and territories for millennia, and promoting, even in some cases, land grabbing, displacement of indigenous peoples and local communities, and overall injustice. The discussions on resource mobilization came too late without giving too much time for countries to arrive to an ambitious framework, and this is something that worries us a lot. So it doesn't matter how much nice language we have in the framework, the lack of ambition and the lack of means of implementation, the lack of changing of how the financial flows arrive to the grassroots are going for us to be more of the same. We, the youth, but also women and girls, indigenous peoples and local communities have been implementing biodiversity conservation and restoration for years and years with no funding, without support, and even with our rights being threatened. And we don't see a change in this framework. We feel that it's going to bring another decade of more of the same. Finance going to the actors that are not implementing the right solutions and not having a clear component on regulation of the actors that are behind the destruction of biodiversity and ecosystems is not going to bring us any change. And we don't have 10 more years for bad implementation. We cannot wait until the post-2030 Global Biodiversity Framework to see a change of direction. And we are very worried that this is not going to ensure the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment that has been promised to us and to the future generations. I pass the microphone to my colleague, Derek.
Thank you. My name is Derek Mugisha, and I'm from GYBN, Uganda. What we want moving forward, we have elements that reflect transformative change, but we are disappointed because we didn't get what we need for real transformative change. Although we are disappointed, of course, we need to move forward with implementation. And we need to remember that young people are here and are going to be implementers. We are going to start implementation. We will be on ground as young people. We are the first ones, of course, to take action, as we have already been doing in our communities. We are going to keep doing the work on the ground, no matter what way this is. We need to expect that our countries now realize that we are part of this. We need to be included. Now they have a mandate to include us. Let's move the resources on the ground. We are watching the implementation and we are here. Thank you.
Thank you to my fellow activists for this comprehensive insight on our work over the last 2 weeks. And now to answer the question in one sentence of why we are all here. Is the GBF going to assure us a future? No. Despite the numerous hard-earned successes we celebrated, the GBF is a continuation of the status quo. That means that another decade will pass, mostly happening the same. And if I may allow myself a personal comment, it is not the GBF, not your policies, not your empty promises that give me hope that we can still overcome this crisis. It is us, we, the youth, who stand up all over the world for the same goal, a future worth living for all. We who can organize and dare to dream for a better world. But once we are going to be the decision makers, I fear it's going to be too late. Thank you. Yeah. Then it only remains me to mention that we will be sending out a press release in a few minutes, and we will be available to answer your questions. Are there any? Yes.
Hi. Can you be more specific? Why do you think that nothing has changed with this framework? Why are you so disappointed? Since there are some people who feel somehow optimistic regarding some of the issues that have been included in the framework. So, what was your ambition, and what has made you feel so disappointed? More specifically, please. When you say that this is a lost decade, for example.
One of our main goals as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, but global youth movements around the world, has been to call out false solutions for biodiversity and climate. False solutions have been implemented all over the world in biodiversity and climate, and they are hitting us nowhere. We can see that we are very far away from reaching the 1.5 degrees, for example, for climate change. And the overall carbon neutral goal has not led us anywhere. So we think that these relative approaches that say that we are going to become neutral in a way have always been a lie, because they somehow represent the result of a mathematical exercise. We offset carbon, we offset biodiversity. We emit carbon in a place, and we are going to plant trees in another place with the hope that it's going to absorb the carbon, and we know it is a lie. And the same with biodiversity offsets and credits. We lose biodiversity in one place, precious ecosystems, functions, and the services it provides to communities. And then the companies, the polluters, they make us the promise that they are going to restore, they are going to recover this biodiversity in this other place. This has never worked. We have seen for years already that these reforestation projects, for example, they have very short-term monitoring schemes. After 2 or 5 years, the companies leave the place, the trees die, and no biodiversity is restored. It doesn't translate into economic compensation for the communities that lost the biodiversity on which they depended. It doesn't translate into biodiversity gain, and it doesn't translate into justice. So having an open door for this kind of false solutions, biodiversity offsets, carbon credits, and in general, these relative approaches that are not clear, strong regulations for the polluters, for us is something that is going to bring more of the same for another decade.
Hi, I'm Diwakar from Nepal. I represent Earth Journalism Network here. So my question is, any one of you can answer. Maybe you were also directly involved in negotiations. How did you find the parties, mainly powerful parties, respond to your agenda? So were they accepting your agenda, or uh, they just ignored you? Thank you.
I'll start with an answer. We have been, as we said, we have been participating in this process for the past 4 years. And through our efforts, through our community that has been participating, conducting consultations, reaching their decision makers, we have developed strong support from a number of parties for our priorities. And through the support of these parties, we have gained language in the framework that, again, that are reasons to celebrate in a way. But still, again, even with this support, we there are still many aspects where parties continue to to not deliver on the level of ambition, of transformation that we need. And in this way, this support, which we appreciate, is still, not enough.
It's also important to mention that many of our fights are the youth fights, the youth demands, and the things that we can call from parties for support have to be related to youths because this is our constituency. But this doesn't prevent us to make an analysis on the overall ambition and how it's going to deliver to other rights holders, for example, indigenous peoples or local communities, or even the overall question of justice, of historical responsibilities from developed countries towards developing countries. So these are things that we have not asked because these are not our demands, our agenda, but we, making an analysis, still see that there is a lack of justice that is going to be delivered in the framework.
Are there still some questions? Well, then we thank all participants and are now available for one more question.
What do you think about the human rights? Yes, how do you think this CBD post 2020 framework is achieving the topic of human rights? Do you think that is enough, or there is a lack of something in this topic?
Rights-based approaches have been a priority for young people throughout this process. And while we see that there are many wins, and I'll repeat them. For example, we have many references to the rights of indigenous peoples and recognizing their contributions to biodiversity. We have language on access to justice and access to information. And we now even have reference to the protection of environmental defenders. And these are unprecedented. What we worry is that these are not operationalized, that they are not going to be reported on, because most of the indicators that exist are only for ecosystems, for species. They are not. There have not been the processes to develop the appropriate indicators to monitor the social aspects of biodiversity, and this is a big gap that will have to be filled. Moreover, we continue to still fight for many of these aspects to be in the targets themselves. And we are going to continue to call for them to be in the operational parts of the framework. They are important to be there as guiding principles and key considerations for implementation. But in order to make actual change, they need to be monitored, they need to be implemented, they need to be reported on. And there needs to be a lot of political will to actually make these a reality in national policies. We continue to also call for there to be to listen to the demands of indigenous peoples and local communities, especially as it relates to conservation actions that could very well infringe on their rights without the right safeguards, without the right strong policy calls for the respect of their rights. For example, when it comes to protected and conserved areas, to make sure that we listen to their demands for a third pathway that are not under colonial conservation regimes and that recognize indigenous and traditional territories.
Well, thank you all. We will be now available for photos and individual questions in different languages. Yeah, just come to us. Thank you.